I found the photograph tucked behind our wedding picture when I was packing up Rebecca's things. It was a Polaroid, faded and yellowed at the edges. In it, Rebecca was maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. But it wasn't the woman that made my blood run cold. It was what Rebecca had written on the back in her distinctive handwriting. The day I learned what happens to children who tell secrets. October 3rd, 1991. Below that, in different ink, like it had been added years later, "She's still watching, and if you think that's bad, you won't believe what happened next." My name is David, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my wife. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 12. Rebecca was the kind of woman who made you believe in soulmates, brilliant, funny, with this infectious laugh that could light up any room. She worked as a forensic psychologist, specializing in cases involving children. Said it was her calling, helping kids who couldn't help themselves. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to the signs. The way she'd wake up screaming some nights, always from the same nightmare she claimed she couldn't remember. How she refused to visit her mother more than once a year, and even then only for a few hours. The locked box in her closet that she said contained old college papers, though I'd caught glimpses of what looked like medical records and legal documents. But you don't question the person you love, do you? You trust them when they say some doors are better left closed. Rebecca grew up in Millbrook, a small town about 3 hours north of where we lived. According to her, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and nothing interesting ever happened. Her father had died when she was 12. A heart attack, she said. And her mother, Patricia, still lived in the same house where Rebecca had grown up. Patricia was difficult. I'd met her only a handful of times, but each encounter left me unsettled. She was one of those women who smiled with her mouth but never with her eyes, who asked pointed questions disguised as polite conversation. She had this way of looking at Rebecca that made my skin crawl, like she was studying her, cataloging her reactions for some unknown purpose. "She's just protective," Rebecca would say whenever I brought up her mother's odd behavior. "She's been through a lot." I accepted that explanation because I wanted to, because questioning it would mean questioning Rebecca, and Rebecca was my anchor in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. Everything changed last March when Rebecca got the call that Patricia had suffered a stroke. We rushed to Millbrook, arriving at the hospital just as the doctors were explaining that Patricia was stable but would need extensive care. That's when Rebecca made a decision that surprised me. "I need to go back to the house," she said, her face pale and drawn. "There are things I need to take care of before she comes home." I offered to come with her, but she shook her head. "This is something I need to do alone, David. Please." She was gone for almost 4 hours. When she came back, she was carrying a small cardboard box and looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her hands were shaking, and there were tear stains on her cheeks. "What happened?" I asked, but she just shook her head and set the box in the trunk of our car. "We're leaving," she said. "Now." The drive home was silent except for the sound of Rebecca crying softly in the passenger seat. Every time I tried to ask her what was wrong, she'd just say, "Not yet. I'm not ready to talk about it yet." That box sat in our closet for 2 weeks before Rebecca finally opened it. I wasn't there when she did. I was at work, but I came home to find her sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered photographs, documents, and what looked like newspaper clippings. She was holding that Polaroid, the one I would later find behind our wedding picture. "David," she said, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes, "I need to tell you something about my childhood, about why I really became a forensic psychologist." She patted the floor next to her, and I sat down, my heart already racing from the look on her face. "My father didn't die of a heart attack," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was murdered. And my mother killed him." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "Rebecca, what are you talking about?" She handed me the Polaroid. "I was 9 when I took this picture. Well, when someone took it of me. That woman next to me? That's Dr. Helen Morrison. She was a psychiatrist who worked with the police department. She was interviewing me about what I'd seen the night my father died." My hands trembled as I looked at the photograph. The little girl who would grow up to be my wife looked terrified. Her small hand clutched tightly in the woman's grasp. Even in the faded image, I could see the fear in her eyes. "What did you see, Rebecca?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow, distant. "I saw my mother standing over my father's body with a kitchen knife. There was so much blood, David. So much blood that it had soaked through the floorboards and was dripping into the basement below. I felt like the world had tilted off its axis. But your father's death certificate says heart attack. I've seen it." Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Money talks in small towns, David. My mother came from one of the founding families of Millbrook. The Weatherbys had been there for generations, owned half the businesses in town. When the police arrived that night, my mother told them that my father had suffered a heart attack and that I was traumatized and making up stories. She pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping and handed it to me. The headline read, "Local man dies of sudden heart attack." The article was brief, mentioning only that Thomas Morrison, 34, had died suddenly at his home and was survived by his wife Patricia and daughter Rebecca. "But Dr. Morrison believed you," I said, looking again at the photograph. "At first, yes. She interviewed me 3 times over the course of 2 weeks. I told her everything. How I'd heard my parents fighting downstairs, how I'd crept to the top of the stairs to listen, how I'd watched my mother stab my father in the chest while he was sitting at the kitchen table." Rebecca pulled out a manila folder and opened it. Inside were what looked like official documents, all bearing the letterhead of the Millbrook Police Department. Dr. Morrison documented everything. She was building a case, gathering evidence. She believed that my mother had drugged my father, slipped something into his dinner that would make him drowsy and unable to defend himself. I scanned the documents, my eyes catching phrases like potential domestic homicide and child witness reliability assessment. There were detailed notes about Rebecca's statements, observations about her emotional state, even sketches of the crime scene as she had described it. "What happened? Why wasn't your mother arrested?" Rebecca's face hardened. Because 3 days before Dr. Morrison was supposed to present her findings to the district attorney, she was found dead in her car at the bottom of Miller's Pond. The police ruled it a suicide. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You think your mother killed her too?" "I don't think it, David. I know it." Rebecca pulled out another document, this one bearing a different letterhead, the State Medical Examiner's Office. "This is Dr. Morrison's autopsy report. I found it in the box with all the other papers my mother kept." I read through the clinical language, my horror growing with each line. Dr. Morrison had died from drowning, but the autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of her head consistent with being struck with a heavy object. "The medical examiner recommended further investigation," Rebecca continued, "but the case was closed when the local police chief, who happened to be my mother's cousin, determined that Dr. Morrison had likely hit her head when her car went into the pond." "Rebecca, this is evidence of 2 murders. Why didn't you take this to the police years ago?" She looked at me like I was naive. "With what? The word of a traumatized 9-year-old against one of the most influential families in town? And by the time I was old enough to understand what these documents meant, what was I supposed to do? My mother had spent years convincing everyone that I was mentally unstable, that I had never recovered from the trauma of finding my father's body. She showed me more papers, medical records showing that Patricia had had Rebecca committed to a psychiatric facility 3 times during her teenage years. The diagnoses were always vague: adjustment disorder, acute stress reaction, dissociative episodes. Every time I tried to tell someone the truth about what happened that night, my mother would have me hospitalized. She'd tell the doctors that I was having delusions, that I was a danger to myself and others. By the time I turned 18, I'd learned to keep my mouth shut. The weight of what Rebecca was telling me settled over me like a suffocating blanket. The woman I'd married, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been carrying this secret for over 20 years. "Is that why you became a forensic psychologist? To help other children who'd been through what you experienced?" She nodded. I thought if I could help other kids tell their stories, if I could be the advocate I never had, maybe it would balance the scale somehow. Maybe it would make up for all the years I stayed silent. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. There's more, David. The reason I went to the house alone when my mother had her stroke. I needed to find these documents before anyone else did. But I also needed to check something else. She stood up and walked to our closet, returning with a small digital camera. I went to the basement of my childhood home for the first time in 23 years. She turned on the camera and showed me the screen. The image made my stomach lurch. It was a basement floor, concrete stained dark in a pattern that looked disturbingly like the outline of a human body. But it wasn't just one stain. There were 3 distinct areas of discoloration, each roughly the size and shape of a person. David, Rebecca whispered. I don't think my father was my mother's first victim. The camera slipped from my hands as the full implications of what she was saying hit me. You think there are bodies buried under your childhood home. I think my mother is a serial killer who's been operating for decades, and the only reason she was never caught is because she had the entire town protecting her. I looked around our bedroom at the scattered evidence of Patricia's crimes, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. We have to go to the police. We have to turn all of this in. Rebecca shook her head. With what jurisdiction? Everything happened in Millbrook, and half the police force there is either related to my mother or in her pocket. Besides, what proof do we really have? Some old documents that could be forgeries, photographs of stains that could be anything, and the testimony of a woman who's been repeatedly hospitalized for mental health issues. She was right, and we both knew it. But I couldn't just let this go. Then we go to the state police, the FBI, someone who doesn't have ties to your mother. And tell them what? That my mother killed my father 23 years ago based on the memories of a 9-year-old? That she's buried bodies in her basement based on some stains on the floor? The frustration in her voice was palpable, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Fear. Rebecca, are you afraid your mother will come after you if you expose her? She was quiet for a long moment, then picked up one of the medical records from her teenage years. Read this. I took the paper and scanned it. It was from her 3rd hospitalization, when she was 17. The notes indicated that Rebecca had been brought in after what her mother described as a psychotic break, during which she had become violent and threatened to hurt herself and others. But it was the description of her symptoms that made my blood run cold. According to the report, Rebecca had been found by her mother standing in the backyard with a shovel, digging holes in the ground while muttering about finding the others. She was trying to look for more bodies, I realized, and my mother had me committed for it. But David, look at the date on this report. I checked the date, September 15th, 2008. I don't understand. What's significant about this date? Rebecca pulled out her laptop and opened a web browser. After a few minutes of searching, she showed me a news article from the Millbrook Gazette dated September 20th, 2008. The headline read, Local teen missing after family camping trip. The article described how 16-year-old Marcus Webb had disappeared during a family camping trip to the state park just outside Millbrook. He'd been seen leaving his family's campsite around 10 p.m. to use the bathroom facilities and never returned. The search had lasted for 2 weeks before being called off due to lack of evidence. Marcus Webb was my high school boyfriend, Rebecca said quietly. We'd been dating for about 6 months when he disappeared. The night before he went missing, he told me he was going to help me prove what my mother had done. He said he'd been asking around town, talking to people who might have known something about my father's death. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in the most horrifying way possible. You think your mother killed him because he was getting too close to the truth. I think my mother has been systematically eliminating anyone who poses a threat to her secret. And I think she's been using my mental health history as a cover story, making sure that if I ever tried to expose her, no one would believe me. I set the laptop aside and pulled Rebecca into my arms. She was shaking, and I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. What do we do now? I asked. I don't know, she whispered. I've been carrying this for so long, and I thought finding these documents would give me closure. Instead, I just feel more trapped than ever. We sat there holding each other as the sun set outside our bedroom window, both of us trying to process the magnitude of what we'd learned. I kept thinking about Patricia's cold smile, the way she'd looked at Rebecca during our visits. Had she been calculating, even then, planning her next move? David, Rebecca said suddenly, pulling back to look at me. There's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. My heart sank. What? The stroke that put my mother in the hospital? It wasn't natural. The doctors found traces of digitalis in her blood. It's a plant toxin that can cause cardiac events in large doses. You think someone tried to poison her? I think someone succeeded in poisoning her, but not enough to kill her. Just enough to incapacitate her. The implication hung in the air between us. Rebecca, you didn't. No, she said quickly. But I think I know who did. And I think they wanted me to find these documents. Before I could ask what she meant, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but Rebecca's face went white when she saw it. It's a Millbrook number, she said. She answered the call on speaker, her hand trembling slightly. Hello, Rebecca. The voice was warm, maternal, and completely terrifying in its normalcy. Hello, Mother. I hear you've been going through my things, sweetheart. I do hope you found what you were looking for. Rebecca and I exchanged glances. How could Patricia know what Rebecca had done at the house? I don't know what you mean, Rebecca said. Patricia's laugh was soft, almost fond. Oh, darling, you always were such a poor liar. Even as a child, I could read you like an open book. What do you want? I want to see you, of course. It's been so long since we've had a proper conversation. Just the two of us. Why don't you come visit me at the hospital tomorrow? Visiting hours start at 9. I'm not coming back to Millbrook, Mother. Oh, but I think you will. You see, I've been having the most interesting conversations with the nursing staff here. They're all so eager to help, especially when I tell them about my daughter who works with traumatized children. They find it fascinating that someone with your history would choose such a profession. The threat was clear. Patricia was going to expose Rebecca's mental health records to her colleagues, destroying her career and credibility. You wouldn't, Rebecca breathed. Wouldn't I? I've protected you for so long, sweetheart. Kept your secrets, covered for your episodes. But if you're going to start digging up the past, well, perhaps it's time the world knew the truth about Rebecca Morrison. My name is Rebecca Harris now. Names can be changed, darling. But the past? The past has a way of catching up with us all. The line went dead. Rebecca stared at the phone for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was determination mixed with something that looked almost like relief. We're going to Millbrook, she said. Rebecca, no. It's obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, but it's also an opportunity. She gestured to the documents scattered around us. All of this evidence doesn't mean anything if she destroys my reputation first. If she convinces people that I'm mentally unstable, no one will ever believe what I have to say about her. Then we don't go alone. We take this to the state police first, get them involved. Rebecca shook her head. There's no time. You heard her. She's already started talking to people. By tomorrow morning, half of Millbrook will know about my psychiatric history. She started gathering up the documents, carefully placing them back in folders. Besides, she continued, I think I know why she wants me to come back. I think she's planning to finish what she started when I was 9 years old. What do you mean? I mean, I think my mother has been waiting 23 years for the right opportunity to kill me and make it look like suicide. A troubled woman returning to her childhood home, overwhelmed by grief and old traumas, taking her own life in the same place where her father died. The thought made my blood run cold. Then we definitely can't go. David, don't you see? She's never going to stop. Even if we run, even if we move across the country, she'll find a way to destroy my life piece by piece. This is my chance to end it. By getting yourself killed? By exposing her once and for all. Rebecca pulled out her laptop again. I'm going to document everything. Create copies of all these documents, upload them to multiple cloud storage accounts, Send them to journalists, to the FBI field office in the state capitol. She was typing furiously as she spoke. And then I'm going to wire myself for audio when I go see her. I'm going to get her to confess. Rebecca, that's insane. You just said she wants to kill you. She wants to kill me quietly, make it look like an accident or suicide. She can't do that if she knows I've already shared everything with other people, if she knows that my death would only prove my accusations. I watched her work, uploading files and typing emails, and I realized that for the first time since I'd known her, Rebecca looked truly determined. Not the quiet determination I'd seen when she was working a difficult case, but something fierce and desperate. I'm coming with you, I said. No. Rebecca, I'm not letting you face this alone. She stopped typing and looked at me. David, if something happens to me, I need you to be here to make sure the story gets out. I need you to be my backup plan. The weight of what she was asking hit me. She was planning her own funeral. There has to be another way. There isn't. She went back to typing. But there is something you can do for me. What? Help me plan this. Help me make sure that no matter what happens tomorrow, Patricia Morrison goes down for what she's done. I wanted to argue to find some other solution, but looking at the evidence spread out around us, I knew Rebecca was right. Patricia had been killing people for decades and would continue to do so as long as she was free. The only way to stop her was to expose her, and Rebecca was the only person who could do it. Okay, I said finally. Tell me what you need me to do. We spent the rest of the night planning. Rebecca created detailed digital backups of everything, uploading them to multiple email accounts and cloud storage services. She wrote out a full statement describing everything she remembered about the night her father died, about Dr. Morrison's murder, about Marcus Webb's disappearance. She also wrote me a letter, a goodbye letter in case things went wrong. I couldn't bring myself to read it. By dawn, we had everything in place. Rebecca had contacted a journalist at the state capitol who specialized in cold cases, sending him copies of all the documents along with a promise of an exclusive interview if he agreed to publish the story regardless of what happened to her. She'd also sent everything to the FBI field office, along with a detailed explanation of the jurisdiction issues that had prevented local investigation. Most importantly, she'd arranged for everything to be automatically released to multiple news outlets if she didn't check in with a specific online service every 24 hours. If I die, she explained, or if I disappear, or if I'm suddenly hospitalized again, the story goes public. And if your mother figures out what you've done, then hopefully she'll be smart enough to realize that killing me would only make things worse for her. At 8 a.m., Rebecca got dressed in a simple black dress, the same one she'd worn to her father's funeral, she told me. She attached a small recording device to her bra and tested it to make sure it was working properly. I love you, I said as she was getting ready to leave. I love you too. She kissed me softly. If this goes wrong, if I don't come back, don't let her get away with it. Promise me. I promise. And then she was gone, driving north toward Millbrook and whatever fate awaited her there. I spent the day pacing our house, checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for some word from Rebecca. She'd promised to call me every hour, but as the day wore on, the calls became less frequent. The last call came at 3 p.m. David, she whispered, and I could tell she was crying. I'm in the hospital parking lot. I can see her window from here. How are you feeling? Terrified, but also relieved somehow, like I'm finally going to be able to breathe again. You don't have to do this, Rebecca. We can still find another way. No, we can't. This ends today one way or another. I could hear her taking deep breaths, steadying herself. David, if something happens to me, I need you to know that these have been the happiest years of my life. You made me feel normal, like I could be more than just my trauma. Rebecca, I have to go. I love you. The line went dead. That was 6 hours ago. The hospital visiting hours ended at 8 p.m., and it's now almost midnight. Rebecca hasn't called, hasn't answered her phone, hasn't responded to texts. I've called the hospital 3 times. The first time, they told me that Rebecca had signed in for a visit with Patricia Morrison at 4:15 p.m. The second time, They said both Rebecca and Patricia were no longer on the premises. The third time, they refused to give me any information at all. I've called the Millbrook police, but they claim they have no record of any incident involving Rebecca or Patricia. I've even driven to Millbrook myself, but Patricia's house is dark and empty, and the hospital staff claim they can't tell me anything about patient information. It's like Rebecca has simply vanished. Tomorrow morning, if I haven't heard from her, the automatic release system she set up will trigger. Every major news outlet in the state will receive copies of the documents, along with Rebecca's full statement about her mother's crimes. But I'm starting to think that might not be enough. Because sitting here in our empty house, surrounded by the evidence of Patricia Morrison's decades of murder, I'm beginning to understand something that Rebecca might not have fully grasped. Patricia wasn't just trying to cover up her crimes. She was trying to finish a job she'd started over 20 years ago, and I think she might have succeeded. But that's not the end of the story. 3 days after Rebecca disappeared, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, another Polaroid, just like the one Rebecca had found. This one showed Rebecca sitting in what looked like a hospital room, but her eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, someone had written, "Some secrets are worth keeping. She's safe now." That's when I knew Patricia hadn't killed Rebecca. She'd done something worse. I drove back to Millbrook, this time armed with everything Rebecca had prepared. I went straight to the state police, then to the FBI field office, then to every journalist who would listen. The automatic release system had triggered as planned, and the story was starting to gain traction. Took 6 weeks, but they finally found Rebecca. She was in a private psychiatric facility 3 states away, heavily medicated and diagnosed with severe dissociative identity disorder. According to her medical records, she'd been admitted voluntarily after suffering a complete psychotic break, during which she'd confessed to murdering her own father. The staff psychiatrist explained to me that Rebecca had constructed elaborate false memories as a way of coping with the trauma of discovering her father's body. In her delusion, she'd convinced herself that her mother was the killer, when in fact she'd repressed the memory of her own violent episode. It was a perfect setup. Patricia had used Rebecca's own mental health history against her, creating a narrative that explained away all of Rebecca's accusations while painting her as a deeply disturbed woman who needed intensive treatment. But Patricia had made one mistake. She'd underestimated how much evidence Rebecca had gathered, and how many people were now looking into the case. The FBI investigation into the Millbrook Police Department revealed decades of corruption and cover-ups. They found financial records showing regular payments from Patricia Morrison to various officials. They found evidence that multiple missing persons cases had been deliberately mishandled. And most importantly, they got a warrant to excavate the basement of Patricia's house. They found 7 bodies buried beneath the concrete floor. 7 people who had disappeared from Millbrook over the past 30 years, all of them people who had somehow posed a threat to Patricia Morrison's carefully constructed life. Patricia was arrested on 14 counts of murder, including the deaths of Rebecca's father and Dr. Morrison. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the bodies, but financial records, witness statements from people who were finally willing to talk, and Rebecca's own documented testimony from her childhood. But the damage to Rebecca was already done. It took 8 months of legal battles to get her released from the psychiatric facility. And even then, she wasn't the same person who had driven to Millbrook that day. The medications they'd given her, combined with the psychological manipulation she'd endured, had left her fragmented and confused. Some days she remembered everything clearly. Patricia's crimes, our investigation, the plan to expose her. Other days she believed the false narrative that had been implanted in her mind, insisting that she was the real killer and that I was part of some elaborate conspiracy to frame her innocent mother. Patricia was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She died there 2 years later, taking whatever remaining secrets she had to her grave. Rebecca and I tried to rebuild our life together, but the woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who lived in constant fear that her own memories couldn't be trusted. She stopped working as a forensic psychologist, stopped sleeping through the night, stopped believing in her own perceptions of reality. The worst part was that she was right to be afraid. The human mind is fragile, and Patricia had found a way to weaponize that fragility against her own daughter. Rebecca took her own life on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 32 years after her father's murder. I found her in our bedroom, surrounded by the same documents we discovered together, along with a note that simply said, "I don't know what's real anymore, but I know I can't live with this uncertainty. The official cause of death was suicide, but I know better. Patricia Morrison killed my wife as surely as if she'd put the gun to her head herself. She just did it slowly over the course of decades, using psychological torture instead of physical violence." The case made national headlines for a while. Rebecca was hailed as a hero who had exposed a serial killer at great personal cost. True crime podcasts dissected every detail of the story. Netflix even optioned the rights for a documentary series. But none of that brought Rebecca back. I still live in the same house where we planned our investigation, where Rebecca spent her last night preparing to face her mother. Sometimes I find myself looking through those documents again, trying to understand how someone could be so thoroughly evil, so calculating in their destruction of another human being. The photograph I found that started everything is framed on my desk now, not as a memento but as a reminder. A reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like concerned mothers, respected community members, pillars of society. And sometimes the only person brave enough to stand up to them pays a price that no one should ever have to pay. I've never remarried. How could I? How could I trust my own judgment about people after being so completely fooled by Patricia Morrison? How could I risk bringing someone else into a world where such pure evil can masquerade as love for decades without detection? Instead, I've devoted my life to making sure Rebecca's story is never forgotten. I speak at conferences about psychological abuse. I consult with law enforcement agencies about cases involving long-term manipulation, and I've established a foundation that provides legal support for people trying to escape toxic family situations. It's not enough. It will never be enough to balance the scales for what was taken from Rebecca, from me, from all of Patricia's victims. But it's something. And on the nights when I wake up thinking I can hear Rebecca calling my name from the basement, when I find myself checking and rechecking the locks on doors and windows, when the weight of what we discovered threatens to crush me completely, I remind myself that evil only wins when good people stay silent. Rebecca refused to stay silent, even when it cost her everything. The least I can do is make sure her voice is still heard. This story was completely true, except for all the parts that weren't. Thanks for listening. That's how it happened or didn't. But if it did, don't think it couldn't happen to you. Subscribe to It Happened to Me. A new story drops daily.